Kitsune and Remnant by Red Devil 360, Chapter 16, Going for a Train Ride. Naruto watched silently as his clone disappeared off into the darkness. He had two special seals on him, one that would allow him the ability to operate further out when he normally would, due to the connection Shadow Clone shared with the original. The other acted as a marker so that he would be able to switch with the clone once he was finished with his current objective. His task, you might ask, eliminated General Ironwood. See when he reported that Ironwood had made the journey to Beacon for the Vowed Festival a few weeks ago. The Kage believed that they couldn't let this opportunity go to waste and had ordered him to eliminate the man without implicating himself or the elemental nations in the assassination. That was the tricky bit, figuring out the guard routes, transport times, camera placements. Where the man stayed was all easy work for someone of his caliber. The difficulty lay with making sure they knew it wasn't him. Impossible thanks to the precautious position he was in, being the only shinobi in Remnant, or rather was. The attack by the shinobi last night provided a good scapegoat, and the fact that he would have to hunt the scapegoats miles away, it provides a perfect alibi. Hence why he now gazed up at the Ironwood's personal flagship, donned in his Ambu uniform. Using jutsu so blatantly to get aboard would be unavailable, so he'd have to do it the old-fashioned way. With a deep breath to focus himself, he leapt off his vantage point and immediately disappeared into the shadow of a few buildings. Waiting patiently, he counted down as voices and footsteps grew ever closer. A squad of artless soldiers passed not even a few meters from his hiding spot. Still he waited as they laughed and joked as they walked about what they were going to do since their shift was ending. For a few minutes he shadowed the guards, keeping a careful eye on their mannerisms and voices, studying them each for their ticks and tells. Having picked out his victim, he raced ahead and concealed himself once more in an alley, only a couple hundred feet from the air pads, and waited for the guards to catch up. Sadly, he created a clone, extra careful to conceal the customary cloud of smoke, and lashed out like a viper at the trailing guard. A kunai flashed, and a neat line was cut across the man's throat. Through even his aura, he cushioned his fall and swiftly carried him into the alley, stripped the man of his essentials, and he adopted the man's identity and hinged it into his likeness. A few times to get his voice to the right level, and turned to jog out the alley into the open courtyard. "Hey guys, wait up!" He called out to the group, who was now a few ways ahead. Thankfully, they stopped and turned at his call. "Russet, hurry up, man! Where are you going?" One of the guards questioned. Naruto smiled sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. "Yeah, sorry, I thought I heard something, but it was just a cat in the trash." He shrugged, and the rest of them accepted the lie and continued to the air pads to board the bullhead. He stayed silent most of the trip and only talked when a question on a conversation point was directed at him. And in no time at all, they were pulling into the airship hangar. They stepped out the bullhead and continued on through the airship and continued to idle chatter. "Rusted, we're going to get some food. You coming?" one of the guards questioned when they reached the junction in the hallway. "Nah, man, I'm tired. I can feel a headache coming on. I'm going to try and get some sleep," he answered, and the others nodded and accepted the excuse. Continued to the canteen, while he, still disguised, followed his mental map of the airship towards the barracks. He entered his assigned room and locked the door behind him temporarily. Thankfully, it was empty, and he took out a hidden scroll from his obtained armor and rolled it out onto the floor. A moment later, the corpse of the guard appeared on the room floor. Carefully picking him up, he moved the body to one of the beds and shifted him around to appear as though the man was sleeping, and stripped himself of the armor and weapons he procured, storing them at the base of the bed. Now back in his Ambu armor, Naruto surveyed the room and spotted the area duct grate obscured behind the locker. Creating another clone, he moved the locker and removed the grate. Crawling inside, he listened as both were replaced and the clone dispelled itself. He almost scoffed at how easy it was to get in this place. Again, mentally recalling the map he had memorized, he followed the air ducts for a few minutes before coming to an intersection. Carefully creating another clone, he went right while the other went left to complete another objective. More time passed as he squeezed through the ventilation shaft, the Fox chakra keeping him warm even through the chilling air conditioning of the ship. Eventually, however, he reached his target directly over Ironwood's office. Naruto peered through the grate. The man himself was behind his desk working away as his personal schedule said he would be. Now all he had to do was wait, and wait he did, but not for long. 20 minutes later, and at the point where he started to get slightly uncomfortable and being cramped in the tight confines of the air vents, the lights in Ironwood's office got out, which with utmost silence he opened the vent grate and crawled out, sticking to the ceiling and carefully replaced it. Still attached to the ceiling, he crawled along the metal work until he's behind Ironwood himself. Reaching into his pouch, he grabs a senbon and a jar filled with poison from Suna, and carefully dips the point of the senbon into the jar through the rubber seal. Withdrawing it, he returns to the jar back in his pouch and drops to the ground behind the general, still without a sound. The general was now more animated, moving around in his chair, attempting to call people outside his office without success. His clone had made sure of that too. Still, he was unaware of the assassin behind him. All it took was a single prick to the side of the neck. Sometimes it baffled him how easy it was to end someone's life. When he was younger, it bored him to kill another, to take away one's family and their hopes and dreams, to simply wash away. And now it was simple for him to just prick someone in a particular vein with a particular poison for someone to die in a matter of seconds. He doubted Ironwood even registered the prick before the poison acted and stopped his heart. So was the talent of the Suna poison artists. The power returned only a moment later, on time as always, and Ironwood was presently slouched in his seat, skin already going pale to match his pristine white uniform. Carefully pushing the general's seat out of the way, he reached back into his pouch and withdrew a small memory stick containing a hacking program courtesy of his network here in Remnant. Intersecting it into a little slot in the table, the device getting to work and began downloading all the information on the general's computer. His eyes snapped up, footprints getting closer. His mind raced. No time, only halfway complete the henge. He was no longer himself. The door opens and the clerk walks in looking down at the pad. He is young, not much older than himself. A shame as a kunai whips into his throat before he can even look up. He grabs the body and moves it into the corner, not hiding, but it'll have to do. There's not much time left. More footsteps coming. They must have heard the body fall. Naruto moves to the door and it opens again, letting two guards walk in. Everything all right? He cuts himself off when he spots the body of his boss. That's when he acts, throwing himself at the guards at the back. He breaks the man's leg to bring him down and crushes his windpipe with his elbow. The first spins around in horror and immediately takes a fist to the face, tossing his body in the desk. He steadies himself rather quickly and throws his own punch, which is easily swatted to the side, and the man receives a knee to the stomach, folding him over. The shinobi grabs the back of the man's head and smashes it forward onto the desk until he's sure the man is unconscious. A sharp twist later and the man is dead with a broken neck. The desk beeps and Naruto retrieves the memory stick, now full with important data, and jumps to the ceiling with the great breaks and the uniform with white color of the room, making sure to leave a present for those looking through the room. A few minutes later, he enters and an alarm runs through the entire ship, and suddenly he's moving quicker than before, practically sprinting to the vents despite being on his hands and knees. An explosion rumbles behind him, and the vents shake and noticeably heat up. He has no time to reach the duct he enters, and so he took the next right and leaps through the grate just as the fire from his gift rushes overhead. He landed in a crouch and immediately notices a slight problem. He landed in the cafeteria material. Most of the occupants had stood up to leave as the alarm sounded. Now, however, everyone had zeroed in on his entry. However, shit, he cursed and stood as the crowd mobbed him. The average soldier in Remnant was rather poor in hand-to-hand combat, an area where even the foot soldier of the elemental nations trumped them in. However, being surrounded by over 3 dozen people was especially difficult. The tight quarters that were present between the tables and benches of the canteen, restraining himself to continue, avoiding undue attention to his skills. Naruto, still disguised as another shinobi, cut his way through the crowd, cutting, stabbing, and slicing. Naruto headed for the exit. Like wading through water, progress was slowed due to the amount of bodies he had to go through, and their damagingly annoying aura. He could, of course, start throwing jutsus around, but they had a peculiar habit of exploding, and while he wouldn't mind destroying the ship, he'd rather not be on it while it did. Spotting a gap from in the horde, Naruto increased his efforts and the hole widened as more bodies fell. Now with a clear line of sight, he shunted forward into the door. Without stopping, he threw behind a couple unproper tags and snorted slightly at the yells as they went off. The alarms had already gone off. What was the point in being quiet about it? At this point, he was nothing but a blur. As he raced through the ship, he had to reach the hangar before they locked down the ship. If they did, it would suddenly become a lot harder to escape. The single dangerous thing that the nations of Remnant used in the war was their airships, hundreds of meters long and thick armor. Earlier in the war, nothing the elemental nations fielded could destroy them, expected for exceptionally powerful combination jutsus. For a time, the easiest way to take care of them was to infiltrate and destroy them from the inside. If there were no powerful shinobi present to perform jutsu capable of piercing their hull. However, since the thickness of their hull worked both ways, Atlassian commanders learned quickly that if they locked down the ship, it left no escape route for the enemy shinobi, and the infiltration quickly became a suicide mission. The population of shinobi at that point wasn't exactly high compared to that of Remnant, and so that sacrifice was generally in Remnant's favor. It takes months to build an airship, whereas it takes years to train capable shinobi. It wasn't until the waning months of the war, when spring countries' modern airships were good enough to take on remnants in small groups. After giving the schematics to the other nations, their numbers began to even the odds. Hence why Naruto was sprinting through the ship, hoping the hangar doors hadn't been closed yet. He was banking on the fact that whoever was now in charge of the ship had called in reinforcements from the other two, which presided over Beacon. This would mean that they'd have to leave the doors open to allow the bullheads in. With that thought still at the forefront of his mind, he continued his way through the ship, not even bothering with killing any soldiers that he passed unless they completely blocked his path. Thankfully, he had memorized every corridor on the vessel and knew where to go from anywhere on the ship. Within minutes, he entered the hangar, a larger open area filled to the brim with bullheads and technicians, soldiers as well, lots of soldiers. Without breaking his stride, he ran through 4 seals before anyone had noticed. He even entered Katan Haizekisho. He spoke and breathed a humongous amount of ash from his mouth. The people in the hangar had since taken notice, only to be blinded moments later by the impromptu smoke screen. Yells and shouts of panic echoed around, but Naruto ignored it and continued running, now in the general direction of the door. A new alarm sounded, alerting him that the fact that someone was closing the door. Pumping his legs faster, he swept through the smoke and slid under the closed door just as it slammed shut. Then the last tag he left behind went off. The ship visibly rocketed, and the door bucked as whips of flame and smoke escaped through the gaps. More escaped across the hull of the ship, and secondary explosions lining up the night sky, showing the world as it began to a steady but clearly not intended descent as more explosions ranged its body. Naruto was no longer watching that though. He was focusing on filling out the marker placed on his clone, and a moment later he was replaced. The clone dispelled itself as soon as it entered the tree line. He opened his eyes to a ruined room with a small fire crackling in front of him. A small pot of what seemed like rabbit stew sat above the flames. How kind of him! Next to him on the floor was a scroll detailing the numbers of targets he might have to face and where, apparently in the subterranean tunnels, according to what the tunnel had sensed. Pretty far down, too. He waited another hour to rest and eat after his impromptu assassination. While he didn't really need it on the grounds of being a Jinchuriki, it was nice to sit after a mission to reflect on what he did and what he could have done better. After an hour was up, he stood and kicked out the ashes. After dousing the fire with a small water glob, he stretched and walked out the room and into what once looked to be a larger city. But now it was nothing but rubble and twisted and rustling metal. Even from his position in one of the buildings he could hear the sounds of grim scurrying, growling, and howling. No doubt his clone had already slain some on his arrival. The area disconcerted him, reminding too much of the destruction war had brought. This, though, was much older, and vegetation had reclaimed a lot of what it had lost. However, this was not caused by war, but something some would say was worse. Moving on with his task, he set about finding an entrance to the surrounding area, creating a few hundred clones to scour the surrounding buildings for tunnels or hatches. But it was another hour before he found an entrance that didn't require blasting a hole in the ground. It was a tunnel with his entrance destroyed either intentionally or accidentally. It was dark and musty on the way down. Clearly hadn't been used in decades, which hopefully meant that it wasn't the entrance used by the missing Nin. Exiting the tunnel took a while, but it was worth it. It wasn't just underground tunnels like the Ambu headquarters, but an underground city, and a bloody large one at that. Buildings carved from the stone reached what he presumed to be the city above to the ground at least 200 meters below him. A quick survey confirmed there were no guards of any kind near him, and so he proceeded forward towards the edge of a building overlooking what seemed to be the main plaza of the city, and he wasn't disappointed. Far down below lay tracks where what must be White Fang members loading crates onto a train while 5 shinobi and one Roman Torchwick guarded them. His clone's intel was correct after all. 3 dozen White Fang members in total, and possibly heavy weapons, judging from the crates. It appeared as though they were preparing for something. Another attack, perhaps. He supposed that he have to deal with that as well since he was here. He scanned the area for a little while before setting off, jumping straight down from his spot near the top of the building. Between him, 2 White Fang guards without a sound. Eager to get this over with, he advanced forward and swiftly took out the 2 guards and dragged their bodies behind a corner in the dark. Peeking out from the alley, he spotted a squad milling about in the open, and another not too far away, and from there clearly in sight. They must be expecting him. Creating a clone, it already knew its duty, and flanked around to the other group. A few moments later, it jumped out at the far group and began knocking heads together. With them now distracted and the attention drawn on the close group, he himself leapt out and easily dispatched the first squad. Nodding to his clone, it dispelled once it was finished. He continued onwards towards the train, taking out intermediate guards that monitored the way forward, and before long he reached the edge of the plaza. Here was going to be more difficult. A large open area, many guards, including the 5 shinobi, who had thankfully not noticed him yet. He would actually be rather surprised if they had. There was too much ground between him and the train, and any method of trying to sneak closer would likely end in failure. They were simply too many eyes, so going loud was the next best thing. He created half a dozen clones and gave them an equal amount of tagged kunai and sent them off to surround the plaza. It took a few minutes due to the sheer size of the area, but once they were all in position, Naruto started them off. He threw a tag at the group, standing near boxes of what he presumed must be dust, causing it to explode in a particular fashion and scattering the men and women standing near. This also signaled the start of the other clones, and very soon fire and explosions were raining down on the happy, helpless White Fang. Naruto and his clones continued the bombardment for a few minutes until their supply ran dry and allowed the area to fall silent. Mentally dispelling his clones, he stepped out of his cover and walked across the now cratered and scorched ground, carefully stepping over a bed of bodies, full bodies, and the occasional wounded who were quickly given a mercy killing. Two bodies of the five shinobi he found on walk, mixed in with the others, and no Roman torchwick, which meant they were still alive. He was identifying which ones when a loud clacking drew his attention, and the train began drawing away from the rest and down a tunnel. With a single flicker, he was inside the rear train car behind some more crates. There was no one else in the cart, but he didn't want to hinge on the fact that his entrance went unnoticed. Standing up cautiously, he pried open one of the crates with a kunai and peeked inside. Dust, like he thought, whole crystals arranged in a neat pile. Opening another revealed more dust, and the few even contained new firearms. There had to be nearly 20 crates in this cart alone, and from what he saw earlier, it was a bloody long-ass train. They must be planning something massive to need all this. This could arm a small army if his maths was on point, and it usually was due to his experience in making seals where maths actually played a major part. So engrossed with searching through the crates, he didn't notice the door behind him letting in a group of white fang until a poorly aimed shot almost took his head off. He dived behind the crates. He was searching without delay and primed a flash tag as he did, swiftly chucking it up and over. He heard the screams of both pain and anger. He kicked one of the crates forward and into a fondness, clutching his ears, knocking him out. Four more steadily recovering, and one was even beginning to aim in his general direction. He rushed forward and slapped aside the gun and hit him with a palm to the chest. He turned and punched another in the jaw and kicked the third in their chest. The fourth had recovered enough to throw his own attempt at a punch, but it was easily dodged and he joined the rest on the ground. The fifth, on the other hand, tried to make a run for it to the door, but Naruto was quicker and clotheslined the poor man as he tried to get through the framework. From there, it was all the same as he progressed through the ship. Crates after crates were passed as he went from train crate to cart, taking out Fang squads with relative ease ever so often. It was obvious that whoever was in command was trying to slow him down by sending his men out in waves rather than all at once. Um, to try and overwhelm him. Obviously, that wouldn't have worked either, but he decided to humor them all the same and moved to at a sedated pace. But all too soon he reached the roadblock, a preferable one at least, because standing before him, in what he hoped was near the front of the ship, was a giant mechanical beast. It was bipedal and stood over 9 feet. Two large arms came out the sides and bore what he presumed to be most definitely guns that he did not want to be in front of. Before he could analyze it further, the main guns on the construct charged up and unleashed the hail of plasma in his destruction. With only a split second to react, he leaped back and formed a thick wall of water before him. Steam had begun filling the compartment as the plasma connected with the wall, protecting Naruto, but the shinobi knew it wouldn't hold as it was rather weak compared to those he could usually make. There was no water source for him to pull from, so it was formed from his own chakra. It wouldn't hold long, and so under the cover of the steam he dropped the water and rushed the machine, hoping to catch it off guard. Drawing his sword, he swiped at its arms and legs, only to be dismayed when he barely even made a scratching despite the sharpness of his blade. He retreated once more as the machine swung at him with surprising speed that shouldn't have been possible for its size. He sheathed his sword in a single movement and made a hand sign with a deep exhale. A large ball of fire flew through the steam and impacted the machine, causing it to stagger backwards. However, there was no disturbing damage done apart from a little blackening of its armor. It regained its footing and began spitting plasma at the shinobi, who quickly moved behind some crates to avoid its fire. Quickly forming a plan in his head, he created 6 clones which rushed out of cover towards the machine on a suicide charge, hoping to overwhelm him. Digging into his pouch. He grabbed a handful of tags and rolled out from cover and sighted the machine's shadow. The death of his clone had served to thicken the depleted steam in the compartment, and it was currently blind. Capitalizing, he threw the tags and continued to the other side of the compartment in one swift move. A few moments later, the tags now dotting the machine detonated in small explosion, obscuring it from the eye. It came stumbling out, the smoke still very much working, but making a concerning whirring sound as it moved. Spark erupted every so often from the joints. Unperturbed by the machine surviving, he created another clone to distract it from the front. He waited a little while to be sure its attention was drawn before he moved around the back silently. Using one of its legs as the stepping off point, he jumped up onto the machine's shoulder and secured himself with chakra as it tried to shake him off. Drawing his katana once more, he charged it with lightning chakra and stamped down in one move into the top of the machine. He must have hit something important because the machine immediately stopped its attempt to shake him off and began to fall forwards. Having no time to retrieve his blade, he jumped and landed with a roll to cushion his fall. He turned in time to see the machine finally collapse to his feet. Resisting the urge to remove his mask to wipe sweat from his face, he moved to the fallen machine and began inspecting it. Guts and dust he could ignore, but there was no way that the White Fang could build this or even design it. Atlas were a very proud and arrogant people, and on everything they designed, created, and built, it possessed an engraving of the Atlinian seal, rather pretentious of them, but it made it easy to identify which pieces of equipment was theirs, and although he didn't want to believe it, there it was, smack bang in the middle of the black plate was the small symbol of Atlas. Hissing in anger, he retrieved his sword and looked in slight confusion at the blood on the blade. Looking down, he saw a small puddle of blood forming as it seeped through some cracks in the front of the machine. It had a pilot. He huffed in annoyance, but drew back the anger. He was done with this. He threw a scroll on the apartment mech and watched as the whole thing disappeared before grabbing it and securing it in his pouch. With no more distractions, Naruto continued forward through the train, not even bothering with humoring the stalling leader. He simply cut down the defending Fang members. One larger faunus with a chainsaw sword tried blocking him with single-handedly, but he was easily dispatched through a beheading. He had finally reached what he hoped to be one of the last carts, where he was presented with his target. The three shinobi stood before him, a little roughed up from earlier, but none the less glaring at him when he entered the room, until they got a look at his mask. All three took a simultaneously step back in fear. "You," one said. Naruto took a step forward. "Me." "Why are you here? Why now? Why?" another questioned. They were panicking because the Kages needed to get information, so they sent their best, he replied, taking another step forward. "And right now, I need information. We won't tell you anything. They'll kill us if we do." The one to the right yelled, taking out a kunai and brandishing at Naruto. The others followed suit. Naruto unsheathed his katana, but kept it to his side. "That's a shame, but then again, I wasn't really asking nicely. It wasn't even a contest. The one left to die, the one to the left died before they could blink, with the kunai in his heart. The middle barely got raised his arm to deflect another, but was split on a kunai through his chest, and last was incapacitated from cuts to his arms and legs simply because Naruto needed him alive. Walking forward, he sheathed his sword again and knelt down and the collapsed shinobi. "Now I'll ask this once," he stated, simply grabbing a kunai and pressing it under his jaw. "Who sent you?" The man whimpered and tried to move away from the kunai held to his throat, but Naruto grabbed onto his flak jacket and held him firm. "I don't know. It was done through anonymous channels. They hired a third man to contact us." "The third man, what did he look like?" he questioned. Really strange." Naruto got tired of the kunai and instead wrapped his hand around his neck and began squeezing. "But plant! He looked like a plant, half black, half white, cloaked with red clouds." He rasped as his oxygen was gradually denied. Naruto relaxed his hold. "Red clouds? clouds. Black cloak with red clouds, he asked quickly, and the man nodded rapidly in response. Akatsuki, he hissed. Why now? They've been quiet for years. Without another word, Naruto swiftly broke the man's neck and stood again, looking towards the only other door in the room. It seemed that he was at the end of the train, judging by the sign on the wall saying a control room. He was finally at the end of the mission. He was royally annoyed now and just wanted this over and done with. Another Akatsuki got involved with nothing good came of it. Naruto frowned underneath his mask as his heart sank. If Akatsuki were rearing their ugly heads again, then himself and the other Jinchuriki and the nations were in deep shit. He shook his head to dispel those thoughts. Each member of the self-proclaimed Jinchuriki squad were incredibly strong with the power of a tailed beast on their side. It was the Akatsuki who should be worried, right? Shaking his head again, he gathered fire chakra into his lungs and blew a steady stream onto the bodies until he was sure that there'd be nothing left soon. Turning, he walked to the door and pressed the button to open it, but nothing happened. With a sigh, he took a few steps back before raising his leg and simply kicking the door down with a single swing. Judging by the yelp of surprise, Todoroki wasn't expecting that to happen. Hey, my sneaky friend, we can talk about this, right? Rowan pleaded as he backed away from the controls, hands raised. I must say, I was rather surprised to know that it was you hiding under the cloak all this time. My, what would Osmond say if he knew who he had let in the school? What about your teammates if they found out that they'd been bunking with the mass murderer? He theorized. Naruto walked into the room and drew his blade. Well, then it's a good thing they'll never find out. Roman chuckled nervously as he glanced around the room. Can we talk about this? Naruto continued to approach Roman. Stop the train and I'll make this quick. Roman chuckled again and looked at the window at the front of the train. Yeah, I'm afraid it's too late for that now, he admitted, shuffling towards the door before breaking into a sprint when Naruto turned to look. Outside the window, the train was rapidly approaching a wall slapped in so many neon warnings that it may as well glow in the dark. Naruto sighed heavily through his nose. Well, he doubted this day could get any worse. End of chapter 16.